Hello, everyone. This is Ayami from FilmFestivalCircuit.com and the Assistant Director of the Oregon Documentary Film Festival. We are gearing up for our Spring 2023 season, which will be screening on March 12th at the Clinton Street Theater in Portland, Oregon. But today I am talking with Stephanie Griffith, the executive producer of Ivy Grace, a very powerful documentary that'll be screening in the Spring 2023 season. Stephanie, thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Thank you for having me, Ziami.
So let's jump right in. What inspired you to make Ivy Grace?
So I was inspired to make Ivy Grace by a very personal situation that I was put in. Um, After Roe v. Wade was overturned in June of 2022, my sister-in-law found out she had a very devastating fetal anomaly. Being a resident of South Carolina, she was not able to get an abortion. So our family was put through a lot of pain because of this, and herself and her husband were put through a lot of pain. So I was inspired to make this film just based on things that were happening around me. And I also felt like we had to tell this story so the public could see these real life implications of this legislation that's being passed. And we need to show people how women like my sister-in-law Jill are suffering because of it.
Absolutely, and I feel like the perspective taken at Ivy Grace in the specific case considered is one that isn't actually talked about all that much.
Yes. Sorry, say that again.
Well, it's just this specific case is not actually talked about all that much. We have sides pushing against each other, and then we have someone here who's just really suffering.
Yeah. So her specific fetal anomaly is probably not discussed very often, but fetal anomalies in general, yes, they are not discussed. The politicians, when they create this legislation, sometimes, if you're lucky, they'll say you can have an abortion in the case of rape, incest, or life of the mother. Not all states are doing that, but no one is saying anything about fetal anomalies. And so many abortions happen because of fetal anomalies. And you can tell the fetal anomaly later on in the pregnancy, too. So when you're trying to legislate something like abortion, it's so nuanced. So there's so many things that can go wrong in pregnancies. There's so many things that can go wrong with the fetus. It's virtually uncontrollable. So it's not being talked about. So that's why we made this short documentary. And thankfully, my sister-in-law Jill was enthusiastically on board to tell her story. And I just came in as the executive producer and put together the team on a very short window because we had a goal of releasing the documentary before midterms in November of 2022. So yeah, I got the team together. She was on board to get interviewed. And we also interviewed one of her friends who had the same fetal anomaly,
Hmm.
but this was pre-Roe. So or pre the turnover of Roe. So we used her friend as a comparative of her experience versus Jill's. Yeah.
Totally. Well, what was it like making this? What kind of challenges did you face?
Um, the biggest challenge that I faced was balancing the
Hmm.
sensitivities of the pain and stuff that Jill was going through with vocalizing and telling the story in an appropriate manner. It was a very delicate balance because on one hand, you're wanting to use this painful footage to show Americans, these are the real life implications of these laws that these states are passing. But on the other hand, you don't you have to consider the pain that Jill and her husband Matt were going through. So to me, that was one of the largest challenges. Another huge challenge was our timeline that we put on ourselves because we flew to Charleston, South Carolina in the middle of October, and we spent one day filming, and we had a target of releasing the short before November's midterms. So we basically had a month to cut,
Hmm.
edit,
Wow.
recut, and it was a very skeleton crew. Myself, um, the videographer, producer, and editor. Uh, we worked on it pretty much every single day for 30 days, and with that target deadline, we got to get it out before midterms. So the time was the challenge, and then also just the balancing act of the sensitivities and telling the story in an appropriate manner.
Wow, yeah. I mean, you have to get it out fast enough to make the desired impact. You have to balance sort of the privacy, but also the impact of the story. Did you learn anything from this? What sounded like to be a fairly difficult filmmaking process?
Did I learn anything?
Yeah.
Yeah. I learned I learned a lot. So one of the largest takeaways from the experience um, was making sure you surround yourself with very motivated
Mm,
people who align themselves with your vision, because the girls that I worked with were in the same train of thought as me. So that helped that helped us get our product out in time. If they, didn't believe in the project and didn't believe in Jill and Matt and their story, that might have slowed things down. So I learned that the team that you work with is so vital to
mm.
your end product. Um, yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all this about Ivy Grace. I want to know, are you working on any other projects, anything in a similar vein, or any more documentaries?
Um, so I don't consider myself like a
Okay.
filmmaker. But what's interesting, what's happened from the release of the short is there have been a lot of other women that want to tell their stories. And I feel like my life is kind of pushing me into this area of compiling these stories and getting them out there. So we'll see. I'm hoping for maybe a longer form documentary compiling some of these devastating stories that I've heard. And then also we're always out there to help women that need abortion access. So
Totally. Well, is
mhm.
there anything else you'd like to add about Ivy Grace?
um I just hope that when people watch it, they understand that these long-term implications of these laws being passed in these states have real life effects, and they're quite devastating. So the last thing I want to say about it is please watch and open your heart and understand people are suffering.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing the
Mm.
insight, talking about the film. I think it's going to make a big impact at the festival on March 12th. And I'm looking forward to seeing more from you.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.